All right, so welcome to week 5 of Lent in Plain Sight. I hope that you have been enjoying this study. I have gotten a lot from it and have appreciated the opportunity to just look at everyday items and to see them a little differently and to be reminded of God's grace and God's kingdom, even in these things that surround us. And perhaps that's the best way to remember that God is in our everyday life. We used a quote in the prayer walks this week that was to the effect that if the path to Christ is not through our ordinary life, then where is it? It has to be in our ordinary life. It has to be in the dailiness. It can't be some magical path that we think we have to go out and find. It is, in fact, in the path that we're already on in the dailiness. That is where we find Christ. So I think this study goes along with that very well. So the object that will help us this week is shoes, which was, of course, near and dear to my heart, as I have an abundance of reminders in my house. So I have many, many shoes, as a lot of you know, and I have enjoyed the various styles. I have no favorites. I love them all. So, but I thought this was a great image, of course, to use. Shoes immediately make us think of activity, of motion, of being in the midst of something, of going out. You have to put your shoes on to go out and do things. And so it automatically has a connotation to it. As soon as you put your shoes on, you're going to be doing something. You're going to be active in some way. So I'm going to try and do my screen share, and let me make sure I get this up. Okay, there we are. All right. Well, we are pretty sure we know what study we're in by now, but there it is. In case you are still interested in maybe getting this book, you could, of course, use it at any time. It's a great Lent study, but it could be a devotion for any time, really. So the first section we're going to look at is called "Take Off Your Shoes," and from Exodus 3, verse 5. Then the Lord said, "Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." Of course, we recognize this as being when Moses was in God's presence, gone up on the mountain, and is finding himself there in the midst of the holy, all around him. And God instructs him to take off his shoes. And here is the first quote from Jill. God refuses to be boxed in by our expectations or designations. God speaks from the clouds and out of the burning bush. God uses everything from angels and donkeys to proclaim, instruct, and admonish us. God alone constitutes the holy. Our role is to respond by taking off our shoes, to recognize the holy when we experience it, to turn aside our gaze in humility, to follow instructions and listen. So I think that there's a lot in that sentence, and particularly we're going to come back to it. That idea of humility is in another one of the lessons we're going to touch on today. But I think that's part of I think in the church evolution of churches, where a lot of them have become far more, I guess the word is relaxed, casual, which has invited younger people to come in, which has made it less intimidating, which I think is wonderful. I think if it is something to get someone to come to a church who would not have otherwise, I think that's fantastic. But I think in there, we may have lost a little bit of what it means to be reverent before the Lord and to recognize that we're on sacred ground. And some of the traditional churches, I think, even though they may seem very stilted at times, I think when you walk into, say, an Orthodox church or something like that, you immediately feel like you are in a holy space. I think your whole attitude sort of is affected by coming into a space that is meant for reverence. I don't know if that's your experience or not, but I think sometimes we struggle with this idea of complete reverence and humility before the Lord, and the idea that, yes, you should even take off your shoes as a sign of that reverence. So I don't know. What do y'all think about that? Those are kind of my impressions, but I could be wrong. Perhaps there is plenty of reverence that is still, I mean, I'm not saying people aren't reverent and don't mistake that. I'm just saying it's sort of an attitude that I don't know is cultivated as much in some of the more, I don't know, what do you call it, sort of modern church liturgies.
I never thought about it until my sister-in-law, this was years ago, moved near us while my brother-in-law was overseas, and we invited her to go to church with us. And she's from a Catholic background, and she was very offended.
Oh.
We were chatting with each other before the service began, and it dawned on me that, you know, that's just the way it had always been for me, and it never really had made an impression.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I mean, I would put Reed kind of in a middle place. We're not high church, but we're certainly not sort of anything goes either. It's we definitely have a tradition and cultivate a sense of the sacred, I think, when you come into the sanctuary. But it is interesting, and I think the other thing about this, although, you know, church is a way we kind of learn this and cultivate this, but the other side of this is that the holy can also be anywhere and anywhere you go. It could be in your living room, it could be in your backyard where you encounter God and experience the holy right there. But I think if we don't already have that understanding of what it means to turn aside our gaze, that we can't even look at we cannot look directly at God, but God is present with us in a special way sometimes that is very holy, and to be able to receive those moments with humility and awe. So
I have one comment.
Yes, Linda.
I don't know where my picture is, but my grandchildren made the comment one time. They were about 12, 13. We used to have dress down Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Have we had that since you've been here? It's usually
not really.
Usually in May, and you could just come, you know, in a t-shirt or flip-flops or whatever. And they made the comment once, people don't act as good on dress down Sunday.
Oh, interesting. So even what we're wearing affects. And that's interesting because we're going to have a little a section on the armor of God, which is kind of in that vein. But that is interesting. Even the younger folks are like, it changes a little bit, because if you signal that this is informal, this is casual, it's like going to, you know, the store or going out somewhere to eat or something, then maybe it loses some significance. I think that idea of I'm preparing for worship and I put on something different, even if it's just, you know, your high heel shoes or your sports jacket or whatever it is, I do think it has an effect on you, that there is a sense of preparation, that there is a sense of expectation that you're going into a place that is, you may not have that mountaintop experience, but you will certainly be in God's presence and be ready and expecting that, and to be reverent. Interesting. And so again, I threw out these questions more for your reflection than if you want to answer, I'm thrilled. But if you don't feel comfortable answering online, I understand that. But I threw these out for you to think about. Jill asks, have you ever experienced holy ground in an unexpected place? What about it made it such? And I imagine all of us have had that experience. I mean, God is everywhere. He's not just in the church, certainly. And I think we are often caught off guard by those moments of sacredness, of holiness, where we didn't see it coming. We didn't expect it.
We had a time, we were in church about 2 weeks ago in Savannah at an Episcopal church with Jay and his family. And a lady that we had heard sing once before, but anyway, everybody was scattered out and thinned out because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And she was in the balcony where their organist is. And she sang, "Give Me Jesus."
Oh yeah, great song.
And she had a voice that just absolutely, I wasn't expecting it. Just, as soon as she started singing, I felt this mysterious, well, it was a numinous experience. I don't know if y'all know that word or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's supernatural or kind of mysterious, filled with a sense of that God is here. Anyway, I wasn't expecting that in church that day, but just in her voice. And afterwards, I went up to her and I said, I have a friend that's dead now, who's in Augusta, named Jessie Norman, and you reminded me of her. And this lady was a Black lady, and very big, and she just broke down in tears when I told her that her voice reminded me of Jessie Norman.
Oh wow!
I thought the whole experience that morning with her singing "Give Me Jesus,"
Wow.
It was one of those times.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Jerry, for sharing that, and the connection you made because of that. This woman, otherwise you probably may not have talked to after the service. You may
No,
not,
I wouldn't have.
Right, you may not have felt, really moved to speak to her, but in that moment that was between you was also a sacred moment. You gave her something, a gift that touched her as well. So it was that often happens. Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. Yeah, it takes you by surprise most of the time. We expect it, and yet we're sort of taught to expect it, but then when it happens, we're generally caught completely by surprise. So yeah,
we all have experienced things in nature too.
Mm-hmm.
I was driving home from Covington one day, and as I got more out toward our house in the country, come up a hill and around a curve, and all of a sudden the sunset was in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
I can still see exactly what it was like. It was so unexpected and so absolutely gorgeous.
Mm.
I pulled off the road, literally.
Wow.
Thank God for it. It was just like Jerry's experience. It just hit me in a way that was very unexpected.
Yeah, it can, and it can come through such, maybe that music, that person's voice, or just that vision in front of you, that gorgeous, expression of God's creativity in nature, and this stunning view, this beautiful sunset. It can really come at us, and then I think from that, hopefully, we spend time reflecting on what was that was so holy in that, and what does that reveal to us about God? How is God speaking through that moment? And then just another thought for you to think about: have you ever metaphorically or literally taken off your shoes as a sign of respect or humility? I'm going to let y'all think about that one, because I've spent more time on this one than I thought I would, but it was great. Thank you for the discussion. That was wonderful. So we're going to go to the next one, and this is combining two lessons. One is shoes for mission and new shoes. And y'all, I would definitely wear those shoes down there in that corner. in the I definitely wear that. I think they're actually a museum piece, but they were somebody's shoes. So shoes for mission and new shoes. As we think of, obviously, shoes for mission, from Mark 6, he ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. So bring 1 tunic, don't even bring a spare, bring 1 tunic and 1 pair of sandals. Be unencumbered and ready to move. And then to this, Jill is adding, if we too seek to serve, our shoes should reflect our willingness to go wherever Jesus sends us, to whoever welcomes our word and work. And then the second quote for this, shoes for mission allow for jumping into a community with both feet. Dressing for mission may call on us not only to pack light, but to give up whatever we have brought on the journey. So, and part of that second quote was, sometimes you encounter someone. She tells a story of a man who had encountered someone whose shoes had been completely worn out, that was all he had was the shoes that were on his feet, and they were really terribly worn through and almost useless. And the man traded his shoes for this other man's falling apart shoes. And, I remember, way back, this was a long time ago, but one of my Sunday school classes in my home church, I was teaching, and we were talking, I don't even remember what the topic was. It might've been love your neighbor or something similar. And she had bought this beautiful new coat, and it was winter. And the next week she didn't have the coat, and we're like, oh, what happened? You're not wearing your beautiful coat. She had seen a woman walking, and it was very cold. This was midwinter, Charlotte, a little bit colder than here, and she was visibly expecting. So here's this woman walking out in the freezing cold, an expectant mother, and she just pulled over and talked to her for a minute and gave her her coat and said, you need this far more than I do. And so it was just, and we were all very moved by that, just because there was this need that could have been seen, but no action taken. She could have driven past and thought, oh, that's too bad, or had some thought about it, but not any action. But apparently that day, not only did she have on the coat for mission, but the shoes for mission, because she got out of her car and she talked to the woman, and she found out that she didn't have a winter coat, and she gave her the coat literally off her back. So now that may or may not happen to us in that particular manner, but I think the idea of just being prepared to serve. Sometimes it's on the fly like that, these chance encounters. But other times, we are particularly going out to serve. We are dressing for mission, which means we need to be prepared, like these boots over here on the left side of the screen, to get dirty and muddy and to do whatever is asked of us. So we need to prepare ourselves for whatever may come, whatever is asked. So we need the right shoes for that, which of course are not the shoes on the right, we'll get to those, but on the left, the ones, the work boots, the shoes that say, I am going to go wherever this mission takes me. And it may take me into places I don't feel comfortable. It may take me into places that are broken and despairing. It may take me into places that are dirty and unpleasant. It may take me to a lot of different places, but I need to be dressed for that, literally and figuratively, ready to move. And then the new shoes. So the new shoes, I'll give a little background on that one. Jill talks about time she was working with a youth group, and they had done some mission work at a shelter, and they had been giving out clothing to those who came in and were needful. And one of the young boys at the end of the day, as they were reflecting, said that, what people got really excited about was when they got new underwear. and new socks and new shoes. And of course, the other kids kind of giggled, but she said, you know, you need something new. Sometimes nobody wants used socks, right? And even shoes, if they're used, can be fine, but imagine getting new shoes and you're having to walk on the streets for most of the day, every day. How quickly those shoes wear out. And she writes, new socks, new underwear, and new shoes could not only make someone's day, they also could enhance someone's health and restore someone's dignity. And then it picks up with what's on the screen. Sometimes something new signifies that someone is valued, worthy, and noticed. Imagine the difference between being handed used things and being handed new things that no one else has ever had on. These are yours and yours alone, and they have never been anyone else's. What that signals to the person receiving, you're worthy of these new things. You are worthy of being noticed and valued. And she extrapolates from that the story of the prodigal son. And I think this is an interesting take on the reunion when the son comes home. She says, this familiar story of the prodigal son tells of a young man returning home expecting to be shamed or relegated to secondary status. Remember, he says, I'll just be one of the servants in the house. You know, he says, I'll no longer be your son. He offers to just treat me as a servant instead. And he's expecting that bit, but instead receives an unmitigated welcome, new clothing, new shoes, and a party. His father sees him, runs out to meet him, and wants only to show him how deeply valued and beloved he is. Grace never does just enough. By definition, grace overflows, explodes, exceeds gratuitously, manifests in unexpected ways. Grace is exhibited by embarrassing public displays of affection, weeping in joy, running in welcome, new robes, new shoes, new rings, a huge party where all are invited so that no one could possibly question their value or belovedness. I think that is an interesting way to look at that. Here was the young man coming home who had fallen to the depths and had nothing left, had spent his money, had been working in the fields with the pigs, and his clothes are worn out, his shoes are ruined. He comes home head hanging, knowing that he has no right to be received back, and yet he is beloved and welcome and worthy and noticed. And his father says, remember, bring him a robe, bring him rings, bring him shoes. He explodes with grace over his son. It's a beautiful moment. I've always loved that story. There's so many layers to that story, but that's one little moment of it that I think is quite beautiful. Any thoughts on that? Either one, mission shoes or new shoes?
You know, when I lived in Atlanta, I used to listen to Michael Youssef on the radio, and he was from the Middle East, and he preached about the prodigal son, and he said that for a man to run was like the most undignified thing you can do, and just how that was hugely significant in that story, that the father ran to the son. He says it's lost on our culture, but he says that was, like you said, an embarrassing display of affection that was would have a tremendous impact back then.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There is a holy moment there between the father seeing his son and the son coming home, and the expected reception probably would have just been the father waiting for him to get all the way to him. But that running, a patriarch of the family does not run out to anybody, right? But no, he's so overwhelmed with love for his son. that he runs to him to meet him. Yeah, thank you, George. It is a big moment in that narrative. Anyone else?
And if any of y'all ever been to a foot washing
Yeah.
where you had to take off your shoes, did that in Jay's church about a couple of years ago in Savannah, and it was it was another numinous experience.
It is. It's yeah. Because you have, and it adds another layer of that closeness, physical closeness to somebody. To touch someone's feet, a stranger's feet, is allowing them to allow you. it's a two ways, this openness and this shared moment of service and humility. And yeah, those are beautiful services if you've ever been to one. All right, I'm gonna move us along then to not worthy to even untie his shoes. Oh, something got left there. From John 1:26-27. The one who is coming after me, I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandals. And of course, you recognize that from when John the Baptist was asked if he was the Messiah. Because I baptize with water. Among you stands one whom you do not know, the one who is coming after me. I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal. This is where we're coming back to that idea of humility that really stands out to us. And Jill writes, I suspect not only John's testimony, but also his humility got their attention. The virtue of humility stands out in its rarity. Clarity of purpose and an unwavering belief in God's call paves the way for a life that inevitably points away from self and toward the divine. A life that prepares a path for the present and coming Messiah. Yeah, this story, imagine, because, John could have propped himself up a lot more, right? He could have said, I have been chosen for this particular time. He could have tried to elevate himself far more. I mean, he chose to go out into the edges of the city, into the wilderness where there's nothing of comfort, to baptize in the water and the river and the people coming to him. Now, he could have chosen a different way to bring this message, right? He could have chosen to be in the city at the synagogue in his comfortable home, right? Presuming he does have a home somewhere instead of just living out there in the midst of the wilderness regions. But he understands that it's not about him, that his job is to point away from himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes where there is nothing to elevate him in status. In fact, I'm sure many thought he was simply just out of his mind. But yet people were coming, and they were coming to be baptized and to hear about the one who was coming after John. Not about John, but the one who was coming after John. That's a huge difference. John wasn't saying, come listen to me, tell you what I think. He's saying, I'm here to tell you about the one who's coming after me. Always pointing outward, always pointing away from himself, always saying it is the one who is to come that you need to prepare for. Not for me, for him. But I'm telling you he's coming. So come and be cleansed in these waters, come and prepare yourself, put on those mission shoes, but the one who's coming, his sandals, we're not worthy to even tie the strings on his sandals. I think that's a powerful message as well. And I think if you've seen, there's some famous paintings as well where John is pointing away from himself and towards the Christ, and just that outward oriented faith that is so rooted in humility. I'm sure that did draw a lot of people's attention as well, that this wasn't someone who was trying to get the attention and anything for himself, that it was always for the coming of Christ's ministry that was about to begin. And I think that clarity of purpose is important too. John knew from the get-go that that was what he was called to do. You know, his mission shoes were on, and he knew he was going out. He was going out and away from, you know, again, that away from, he was going away from the city, away from his own comfort, so that he could point away from himself, you know, and his work shoes were on. He knew very clearly what his call was. We don't always have that clarity of our call, but I think we are called to continually try to understand what the call is on our lives. The second quote by Jill: "We are not called to be John the Baptist. His role has been filled and does not need to be repeated. And yet we are called by God to prepare to receive Jesus personally, and then bear witness to him to the ends of the earth once we do." So we are still called to be witnesses to Christ. Not in the exact same way of John the Baptist, but in the way of bearing witness to his life, death, and resurrection, and that he will come again. And none of us are worthy to untie the thong of his sandals either. Remembering that we don't have all the answers either. And it is not about us or how faithful we are or how pious we may appear to be. It is always about pointing away from us towards Christ. So I'm going to pause there for just a moment if anyone wants to throw out any reflection on that or has a thought. I think this is an important message for us. All right, I'll let y'all think about that one. And then the questions that Jill offers. What is your God-given purpose? Now, sometimes we have thought about that long and hard and we have something to answer, but I think it's an ongoing question, actually. I think, yes, we have an overarching answer to love and serve the Lord with our lives, but in particulars, sometimes that's very hard to answer. How exactly are we called? Because we're all called differently. What is your God-given purpose within the overarching purpose? How are you preparing yourself and others to welcome Jesus? I think those are great reflection questions. So I hope that you will take those into your thoughts for the week and continue to ponder that, because our purpose sometimes changes over time. Our particular purpose within our serving the Lord, how we go about it changes. So I think we have to always be ready to pick up a new pair of shoes, you know, for a different mission that comes our way. Because over our lifetime, it may be different things that God is asking us to do that is part of that purpose. So think about those, I hope, this week as you're praying and reflecting. And again, how are you preparing yourself and others, not just yourself, but others, to welcome Jesus? Another great question. All right, this is the last one we're going to look at. Shoes of proclamation. Down at the bottom left, you have the Ephesians quote: "Stand therefore and fasten the belt of truth around your waist and put on the breastplate of righteousness. As shoes for your feet, put on whatever will make you ready to proclaim the gospel of peace." Whatever you've got, put them on. Whatever is going to make you ready, whatever is going to allow you to go out and share, to proclaim, to evangelize. Put on those shoes. Those are the ones you're going to need, and go out. Of course, this is part of the armor of God passage that talks about, you know, the breastplate of righteousness as well. That one is in the quote. So this whole thing And I know the children have been studying this, and so I thought that was kind of fun that this was part of our study too. But I know with the little ones who've been studying this with Joy, what makes up the armor of God. But this particularly looking at the shoes. And Jill writes, this armor of God enables children of the Christ child to do the arduous, ongoing, daily, endless work of peacemaking, real reconciliation, and beloved community building. There's a lot in that sentence. Arduous. It's going to be hard. Arduous is not a word you use when things are going to be simple. It's going to be a journey. It's going to be complicated at times. It's going to be difficult. Ongoing. Yeah, this isn't a once and done kind of thing. I went out and proclaimed. It's like, think of Jonah going to Nineveh. He kind of had that once and done attitude, right? He walked about a third of the way into the city of Nineveh. Nineveh said, here's what God says, repent or your city's gonna be destroyed. And he's like, I'm done. He walks away. Once and done. It's ongoing. It's daily. Daily. Do we think of this as daily? Probably not. We may think of it in chunks of time or specific mission that we're doing. Or, when we're together in fellowship or things, that's when we're proclaiming, but no, it's daily. And then just to emphasize it even more, Jill adds endless. Endless. Or we could say ceaseless. We have that great line in Thessalonians, to pray without ceasing. Well, we have to work the process of proclamation. The act of proclamation is also without ceasing. The endless work of peacemaking. How are we bringing peace? How are we helping to facilitate peace in our community? Real reconciliation. How are we helping to bring healing through reconciliation? And beloved community building. And I like that she added beloved, not just community building, but beloved community building. We're not just in it because it's good for everybody. We're in it because we love our neighbors and we want it to be a mutually loving community. How do we do that? Well, we put on those shoes, the proclamation, we go out and continue to live what we know in our hearts, the truth of the gospel. And then she adds, the irony, of course, is that this holy uniform does not protect us from physical harm. Instead, those shoes of proclamation take us to places where we are made utterly vulnerable. In other words, those shoes walk us smack dab in the middle of those being crushed by the cosmic powers of this present darkness in order to bear the light of Christ to the ones in deepest need of his love. Now, you could find someone who is in darkness in the CEO's office of a high-rise building. You could find someone who has been crushed anywhere. But we know that a lot of those who are crushed to their core, who are suffering with addictions, who are suffering from abusive home lives, have left those places and have no safety of their own and no home of their own. And those are the places we will encounter the people who really, really need to know that they are loved. They need that new pair of shoes handed to them to be noticed, to be loved. And those shoes of proclamation, those will take us to wherever that darkness is. We're going to have to walk right into it. As she said, smack dab in the middle of those being crushed by cosmic powers. And again, they could be anyone. But we've seen how homelessness can crush the spirit. how addiction can rob dignity, how all of these things need our beloved community building to put on those shoes and walk in and be willing to do it. And her question, what shoes do you need to put on in order to proclaim the gospel of peace? What do those shoes look like? Where are those shoes going to take you? How are you going to get there? Would be another great question. How am I going to prepare myself to go into these places of darkness? Because I need to be ready too, right? I need to know very surely what I'm going to bring and how I'm going to bring this message, so that I'm ready to walk into whatever situation God asks me to. Any thoughts or questions on this particular one? We're getting close to the end of our time together.
Reading this morning in my utmost, and how Paul did this is he seemed like he constantly reminded him that I have been crucified with Christ.
Yes.
That he didn't say, hey, Lord, here's what I'm going to do for you. Here's how I'm going to use all my training to accomplish things for you. He said, I have been crucified with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And in that vulnerable, humble position of getting self out of the way,
Yes.
it puts us in a position where maybe God can use us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Jerry. Yeah. Paul talks about that. I preach Christ crucified too. And he says it also in that way. I preach Christ crucified with as you said, with his own life as an example. And then that's what he goes out and talks about, very much in the vein of John the Baptist, right? And think about who Paul was before. It was all about Paul when he was better known as Saul. It was all about him, and it was pointing all to him, and his power and his knowledge, and after his conversion, it's all about Christ crucified. Yeah. Different pair of shoes, totally. Putting on some different work boots for that. Yeah, just to think and remind ourselves that this is daily. These are things God asks us daily to do, to go out and be examples, and to bear witness, and to love one another. These are big jobs. We're going to fail a lot, y'all. We're going to fail a lot. We're going to trip over those shoes we put on. We're going to leave the laces untied and fall all over the place. But we put them back on, and we get up the next day, and we go back out, and we continue to try and be the one who brings words of peace and love. And not just words, but actions around those words. Yeah. So I've enjoyed this week's lesson a lot, not just because it was about shoes, but I think it does remind us of the action that is required in our faith as well. Not just the study, not just the understanding that we have, but the action that is required in the object of shoes. So as you are putting on your shoes today or looking at your shoe collection, you may not have a collection. I have a collection, but I have shoes for every occasion, which I now consider to be preparation to go wherever God calls me, because I have the shoes for it. I'm ready. But just to think about that, what they represent, how do we go, and where do we go? And what are we going to say when we get there? Any last thoughts on this study from any of the slides or topics we covered today on shoes?
I think that this analogy of shoes or topic of shoes is pretty brilliant, because in its most basic sense, our shoes are our connection with the world, physically and spiritually and motivationally. It's just it's that level, that basic level of where we connect with the world.
Yes, yes. And actually, Brandon, thank you. That reminded me, one last little note I want to throw out there that I actually heard this weekend. I've been at a conference, a virtual conference for the last few days. And someone had talked about that, you know, when, maybe you do this often, but a lot of people don't. When was the last time you were, say, out on a trail or somewhere like that? Not the beach, because that would be a given, but somewhere in a field or a trail or somewhere like that, where you took off your shoes and stood barefoot and felt connected to the earth. That very first slide we looked at, taking off your shoes in holy ground. There are times when we need to take off our shoes as well, and to feel that connection to creation again, to be our skin against the earth, to know that we are on God's creation and in his presence and his ongoing creation in us. So those moments when we take off our shoes are also important as well, to be reminded, yes, I am part of this creation and I'm standing before the creator, and therefore I will take off my shoes in his presence. So thank you, Brandon. That kind of reminded me of, someone was mentioned that in a different context this weekend, but it was, I think, also important as we think about holy ground as well. Well, thank you guys. I have enjoyed this class. We're a little bit over. And next week will be oil. So we're going to think about the object of oil and how do we see that as helping us in our understanding of our faith. Thank you all so much. I am still technically off, but I wanted to teach the class this morning. So I will not be in worship today, but I will be attending virtually. And I hope that you have wonderful service, wonderful day of Sabbath, of rest, of contemplation, and that you will consider some of those questions that were posed by Jill. And thank you for being here with me this morning. So take care. Thank you. And I hope I'll see you next week.
Mhm.
Bye, everybody.